Good afternoon and welcome to a deep dive into the SBA Restaurant Revitalization Plan, how to track, spend, and optimize for success. And we are thrilled to have the teams from HD Davis CPAs and Apple Growth Partners here in collaboration to really dig into this topic. Without further ado, before we get started, we do want to thank the folks at Soft Touch Furniture for making this possible. They are great providers to the restaurant industry. And I will turn this over. I will just adjust the sharing settings here and turn this over to Kristy. So Kristy, you can take it away and share your screen.
Welcome, everybody. Like Jeff mentioned, this is the Restaurant Revitalization Fund application submitted. Now what? So today's topics that we would like to discuss with you are the eligible expenses for the grant money that is given by the Restaurant Revitalization. The second thing we're going to discuss today is the post-application reporting requirements. And third, we are going to talk about the taxation matters. And last, that interplay with the PPP and the ERTC, excuse me. So our first topic, like I mentioned, is the eligible expenses. First one on the list is rent. This rent, just to let everyone know, this rent does not include a prepayment for the rent. And also talking about eligible expenses, let me back up. Just for eligible expenses during a covered period, that covered period is going to begin between February 15th, 2020 to March 11th, 2023. If the business, the restaurant closes permanently during that covered period, then the covered period would be considered when the business closes or March 11th of 2023, whichever is sooner. So now that we have kind of talked about the eligible expenses in the covered period, which is really important. Like I said, the rent, that's the first one on our list, which does not include any prepayment of rent. Second is our equipment. Third is our supplies inventory. And then next is our business food and beverage expenses, including beer, wine, or spirits. And that also includes raw material as well.
For the first 21 days after you applied for this grant, if you're not a priority company, you're not going to have any outreach from the SBA. So you're probably, I think it was what, a week ago Monday that the applications were submitted.
Yes.
So for at least another 13 days, companies that are not in that priority pool are not going to be contacted, and that's totally normal.
Right, and you'll see in your online portal, there's a few steps along in that process. There's the application in progress, e-signature pending, processing, submitted, IRS verification. Most of you will stay in that under review status for the first 21 days. So when you log into that portal, you'll see it it'll go through those first 4 or 5 pretty darn quick. It probably already has if you've already submitted it, but it's going to stay in that kind of limbo status if you are not part of one of those priority groups for the first 21 days.
So back to our eligible expenses, the next one on the list is our payroll costs. Our payroll costs are inclusive to that group and health and care, disability, life, vision, and dental. This also includes sick leave as well. Also, it's medical leave, family leave, vacation, things like that. And the expenses that come with that, if you are on family leave, medical leave, are sick pay as well, the healthcare, disability, life, vision, dental. One thing that it does not include is payments to independent contractors. Those payments are not included in any of those payroll costs. And similar to the PPP loan, it does not include compensation for anyone, individual or owner, over $100,000 as well. And lastly, the one piece of that payroll that it does not include as well is any COBRA payments. Our next item for eligible expenses is debt service, including both principal and interest. not debt service prepayments, kind of similar to the rent, no prepayments there. The debt may include the EIDLs, the PPP, and the SBA loans as well.
I have to admit, this one kind of shocked me in a nice way. This surprised me that we could actually use grant money to pay down. What I'm focusing in on are SBA loans. You certainly, when you think about a grant and some sort of what do you want to call it, disaster, catastrophe, or what have you, usually you're trying to cover operating expenses. That SBA loan probably was not used to cover operating expenses, but you can actually use the grant money to pay it down. I thought this was a pretty nice liberal offering from Congress. The PPPs, of course, most of them are getting forgiven. So I don't even really focus on that. But this one kind of surprised me a little bit in a good way.
Absolutely, Chuck. I totally agree with you on that for sure. Our next eligible expense are utilities, and these are going to be utilities that are used in the ordinary course of business, for which the service began before March 11th of 2021. But also these are also, the eligible expenses include utility payments for a disruption of service for anything like electricity, gas, water, telephone, and internet access as well. So for some reason you had to shut down and those things got disconnected or disruption in service, payments towards those utilities are an eligible expense as well.
I think the biggest thing to note from all this is that this of all the programs that we've seen thus far is the most expansive in terms of how these funds can be used, both on actual items and the timeline, as you'll see, in terms of when the money can be used. So it's
well, that's good because it is late. Right? I mean, of all the industries, I think we've all been waiting on this, right, Tim and Kristy? We've been wondering, where is the restaurant quote unquote bailout program? The restaurants, right. Who got hit worse than restaurants? And it's almost like they were waiting for survival of the fittest or something. You know, who survived? Those are the ones getting it. So I'm glad it's expansive.
I think we're all just hopeful that everybody gets their money. There was a lot of angst created here in regards to this application process. For those of you that have submitted applications for this program, there was a lot of encouragement to get it submitted as the portal opened, and there was a lot of rush and anxiety and stress created surrounding that. So we are truly hopeful that some of the things that they did put in place to allocate dollars to the appropriate sized entities works. So we'll see as the program starts to kind of roll out and unfold and get money in the hands of the industry that probably needs it the most right now.
Well said.
Absolutely, Tim. Yes, absolutely. So it's really nice to see, like you mentioned, that, you know, of all of the programs, this is the one that has the most broad eligible expenses. And it's true, our restaurant industry definitely absolutely needed it. So it is a great resource for our restaurant communities. So next up on our eligible expenses are maintenance expenses for equipment, furniture, fixtures, floors, walls, deck services, things of that nature. Also outdoor seating, construction expenditures. I know that has been lifted, but in some other areas other than Ohio, outdoor seating really is the only thing that they have. So outdoor seating construction expenditures is really going to be helpful for those out of the state. So that's a great eligible expense as well. Next one is our protective equipment and cleaning materials. And, you know, on top of restaurant having a lot of high costs already, you know, adding that protective equipment in the cleaning, you know, to keep everything sanitized more than it typically does on a day-to-day basis without COVID. It's nice to know that we can use those funds for things as, you know, protecting the equipment and cleaning and helping keep all those employees and customers safe as well. Next on the list is supplier costs essential to the ongoing operations, covered supplier costs, made pursuant to a contractor purchase ordered initiated prior to the receipt of the RRF grant funds.
Kristy, you got an example of that, or can you think of one?
Well, Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think this is with, correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, but this is really with respect to perishable goods. If you have a contract or an order with a produce supplier, let's say, before any time during that covered period, this would allow you to, uphold that contract and keep that, you could use those funds, keep that contract, pay for those costs or things like that. I believe that's what this is kind of, directed to. Tim, would you agree?
Yeah, I think that that's the interpretation that we've come up with as well. And I'll tell you that most of the restaurant clients that we deal with and the folks that we've seen in the industry aren't, lucky for them, are not in a horrible cash position at the moment. So there's not a whole lot of outstanding and open invoices and payables and some of those past due expenses, but there certainly is some line here in between, when you incur some of these expenses and when you actually receive some of the money. So I think that some of those ones that as they fall very close, especially in regards to these supplier costs, it's worth keeping on your radar, because as you'll see, as we get further into this presentation, you'll see that there's so much overlap and interplay amongst all of these different programs that in all likelihood, you're gonna need to really pull in all these different expenses from all these different places, whether it's your supplier costs in this example, or protective equipment, or payroll, or utilities, or rent, or all these other things. So what we're encouraging people to do is just make sure that anything that's close, you keep on a list. So that way you can sit down with your advisor and make sure that, the best decision is made. And as I think the phrase has become even more popular during the last 12 months, is the life of living through all of these pandemic related programs and the SBA and government support has been, we are building this plane as we are flying it. And in this scenario specifically, is that if there's a question mark, if there's a maybe, if there's a, I don't know, or I'm not 100% certain, you hold on to it and you wait for clarification. They have done a very good job thus far of really, really posting all of their FAQs and just about any question that's come in all of these programs, whether it be the PPP or the EIDL or now the RRF. I feel like it's like alphabet soup now with all these different programs. But yeah, I mean, the key is if you are close on any of these, put it on your list, put it in your Excel document, put it in your folder or your shoebox, or however you choose to collect all these potential vendor eligible expenses, and just make sure it's on the table, because there's a pretty high likelihood you're going to need them all.
Absolutely, Tim. I would agree with you on that one. In, talking about all the other programs that have, come out before the RRF, it's like, okay, I feel like with the RRF, they have pretty much laid out just about everything that's going to be eligible. There's not a lot of uncertainty there, where in the beginning, when we were applying for the first loan and for the PPP, there was a lot of times we were waiting for the SBA, which they came out with their answers and really gave us some definition that we were a little bit unclear of. But I feel like with the RRF, there is some definite certainty of what can and cannot be eligible. And I feel like you said, it's going to be just about almost everything, so definitely, question those ones that you're just not quite sure of. So moving on to the next one then would be our qualified expenses count, no matter whether they're paid in cash, business, or a personal credit card. Interest expense thereon also counts. So when looking into this one too, it's our business operating expenses. This is our normal business operating expenses that are necessary and mandatory. This is very laid out within the program, and in the details from the SBA. They have to be necessary and mandatory, and that's things that, such as accounting, legal, marketing, insurance, license fees, things like that. So when you come across those type of expenses, that's going to be up for eligibility for these funds. And then lastly is otherwise eligible past due expenses incurred between February 15th, 2020 and March 11th, 2023.
I interpret that to be like fines and penalties.
For that last one, Chuck?
Yeah,
Exactly, like, talking about those past due expenses, those are those past due invoices that may have not gotten paid. Exactly.
got it. Yeah, they've really put this thing on the cash basis. We're not overly concerned when these expenses were incurred, as long as they were incurred in that period. But it's really about when you spend it, and you can, much like tax law, you can count the credit cards as payment.
Correct, absolutely. So our next topic that we're going to discuss is our post-application reporting requirements. As we're hoping that everybody has gotten their application in, and both Tim and Chuck have, touched on that, priority application group that, were the first set of applicants to go in, and then you remain in that review status until for the first 21 days and such like that. So following a successful application submission, all the applicants then enter that IRS verification, like Tim mentioned. In this process, they said, can take up to 7 days, and allows the SBA to validate your application submission as well. So what do we do afterwards? What does that post-application reporting requirement look like for us, for all of our restaurant clients out there? On or before December 31st of 2021, each recipient must report allocation of grant funds usage by expenditure category. And that's going to be done through the application process. With that being said, it leads right into our next point. Document. That I could not stress this any more. And I would have to bet that Tim and Chuck are on the same page with me on this one. After being through the PPP loan applications twice now, documentation is definitely very important. Accurate cash flow tracing is a must. Keeping that clear audit trail is definitely something that you want to, from the very get-go, when those grants are given to you.
We've really tried to encourage all of our, anybody that we've dealt with in regards to any of these SBA programs, whether it was the PPP or the IDL or anything, implant the seed of just assume you're going to be audited. You've been essentially given money from the government, right? You've been given what many people have been throwing out the terms of free money and all this support and all these things. The only thing that you've got to do, there's two things: spend it and track it. And I don't think anybody's gonna have a problem spending it. But tracking it is by far the one area that you have to just go. I encourage people, just go overboard. Make sure, if you need to have a separate bank account for that money, put it in a separate bank account and spend it from there.
Probably the safest thing you can do.
But just isolating dollars, tracking it in whatever form you have, to just scare the heck out of yourself and assume that they're going to audit you. Whatever it takes to trick yourself to make sure that you're tracking this money appropriately, you got to do it, because you don't want to be in the position where you have to give any of this money back.
I think that, and we saw a little bit of this advice with the PPPs about a year ago, but it seems like the safest thing to do is, like you said, Tim, open up that separate bank account, maybe a new checking account altogether, and just pay your eligible bills out of it. Those words cash flow tracing are there by design, because, whenever you have money on hand and then money comes and joins that money, now you've got conjoined money. Do you really have to follow each dollar in to the dollar out? Well, not necessarily, but if you get audited, it sure as heck is a nice trail to be able to say there is no question which monies we spent for these eligible expenses. It was out of that separate checking account.
Yep. And it gives you tracking along the way, is, hey, we're 50% through the timeline, we're 50% through the funds, whatever that allows.
Yeah.
It's been super helpful with a lot of our folks in regards to just the PPP money, is using those separate accounts as a great little tool to just track those dollars as you're spending them.
Exactly. Yeah, it's, the restaurant industry has struggled enough already, and then to have them come back and say, well, you need to repay some of these funds because your audit trail was not, sufficient enough. We don't want our restaurant clients to be put through yet another struggle that they've already been through. So yeah, we did see a lot of our, clients put that PPP money into a separate bank account just because it was a sense of, okay, I know this money is just PPP money. Again, you could do that with the RRF money, especially maybe some smaller, mom and pop restaurants, or they might not have the staff to keep that audit trail as clean as possible.
Mm-hmm.
That money into that separate bank account is going to kind of do that for you.
Good point.
Doing the documentation is very important. But again, so maybe some of the smaller restaurants that don't have the staff, like some of the larger restaurant, clients have, keeping that separate is going to just help in that process. Because like I said, you guys have already been through a struggle enough already. We certainly don't want to, to see them come back and ask for those funds back that they're giving to you. So then nextly, because we want you to document, because we think it's so important, why Tim, Chuck, and I stress this so much, because if those funds are not expended by December 31st of 2021, you will need to be reported in a manner and on an annual basis until fully exhausted. And you must spend that before March 11th. If not, you have to return it. So therefore, all funds need not expended by December 31st will need to be reported on an annual basis until fully exhausted. So
it's likely you will have spent that money by then, right?
I agree.
How much money that all these restaurants are getting. Your loan is calculated, or your grant is calculated as your 2019 sales minus your 2020 sales minus your PPP. The average dollar amounts of these loans are remarkably high. These are six-figure loans for even small operations. These are six-figure loans for, the little delis and little bakeries and the little, these little entities. So it's going to take some time to use this money. So it's not like you're going to come to December 31st and have all the money spent and not have to worry about the documentation. So the vast majority of people that receive these dollars is definitely going to be subject to some reporting under the current rules. So don't take that lightly because it's going to be very difficult to have spent all this money. And again, as you'll see later in regards to the interplay amongst all of the different programs, it may take all the way until March 11th, 2023 to get through some of this.
Absolutely. So again, like I said, the unspent funds due to the time lapse that March 11th, 2023, or permanent closure of the business, those funds must be returned to the U.S. Department of Treasury. So again, echoing what Tim said, yeah, it might take until March 11th, 2023, but if those funds are not spent and you're spending them and allocating them to the all eligible expenses that I've mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, which are vast. I mean, we know there's a lot there. We know that these are, necessary and mandatory operating business expenses and things like that. So we know that there is a broad, vast selection of eligible expenses that we have. So, if we're not spending them due to that time, then, yes, we have to return those funds. And like I said, we all know that all of our restaurants have struggled. We wouldn't want to see that happen. So that's just another note there, just on those unspent funds. And then our last point for our post-application reporting requirements are that applicants and recipients of the funds may be subject to public disclosure and transparency, just as the PPP loans were as well. So
yeah, so that means there will be spreadsheets and websites passed around, potentially in the newspaper and what have you, exactly like the PPP. And it's a maybe, it's not a certainty yet, but in the law, they left that open to be allowed public disclosure.
Next topic this afternoon is our taxation matters. First and foremost, definitely the receipts of the RFR grants are not taxable as income. Just like we finally saw with the PPP that was going back and forth for a while there. It's really great to see that this is not going to be taxable income to our restaurant clients. I know we had to wait a while to figure out with the PPP loans, but this is definitely a plus for all of our restaurant owners.
Huge, huge, huge.
So huge. It's so huge. It makes the world of difference to some of these people that, have been in restaurant business for 20, 30 years. It really is. It's great.
You think about in the restaurant business, your margins are so tiny. You're living on 4 to 8% net of whatever you're pulling down. So, when it comes to being able to supplement so many of these expenses and your largest expenses, your labor, your supplies, all of your costs, this is money that these restaurants can really, truly be using to establish themselves back and into the future for a really, really long time. So, not only do we encourage people, to track money appropriately, but to spend it wisely and not think about how you could be using this to make your restaurant that much better for many, many years to come. So there's a lot of great things to take out of this. The non-taxable piece is certainly huge, but it is something that if used properly, this type of program can kind of catapult you into many, many years of future success if you use it correctly.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we had a lot of these conversations with the PPP as well. The expenses that you can use the RRF money on, they don't look like future improvement expenses, but the truth is they are otherwise expenses that you would have otherwise spent with your profits from the restaurant. So while you're busy covering your operating expenses with the RRF money, you could be using your other money from the operations to be doing what Tim's talking about and building up your restaurant for the future. So it's all a push in a way, just because these specific monies have to be used for non-capital type improvements. Well, what that does is it allows you to use the otherwise usable cash flows for those permanent improvements.
And I think allows people to maybe try things that they wouldn't have tried before. And I think that's something that we've seen as a common thread with a lot of our restaurants over the course of the last year and a half is, things like shorter menus and different hours and different types of food styles and different specials and those things that you didn't try before because you were terrified to go outside of your normal. Right. And this is something that, we all have a new normal, the restaurants especially have a new normal that's by definition very different than the rest of ours. So this is here to give them that comfort and flexibility to be able to figure some of this stuff out. So I think that's something that we've really tried to hammer home with a lot of our clients is the world's different and using some of this money as your security blanket to be able to experiment with some of those different minor changes to your business is what could make a world of a difference for the future.
Absolutely. Again, consulting with your tax advisors about that spending, I think it is a great point that you had made. Making sure that you're not just spending it to spend it wisely to extend that, the life of your business and to pass that on to generation, making sure you're consulting definitely with your tax advisors on what to do with those funds. I mean, that's what we're all here for. Tim, Chuck, and I, that's what we're here for, is to help you guys, with the spending of that money. So it's really important, and great point, Tim, about, doing things that, they may not have been able to do in the past. I know a lot of restaurants, that to go, that delivery, those DoorDash, Uber Eats services and things like that came out of like, it it increased so much during COVID.
Mhm.
So that's something that, maybe a smaller restaurant or even a larger restaurant, maybe do differently or things like that. Definitely we're living in a different world, and change is something that I know a lot of people sometimes struggle with, but that needs to be also for the good. So, maybe you do change up some things with the restaurant and your processes and things like that, but that change could also be for the good, because we are living in a different world than we were a few years ago. So taxation matters, getting back to those, one basis in a pass-through entity increases by the amount of the grant receipt, as if it would if the receipt were taxable. So that being said, is that your basis is increased by the grant amount, but it is not taxable income. Am I saying that correctly, Chuck? I just want to make sure. Okay.
Tax wise, this is a very friendly program.
Absolutely.
Very friendly program. The government is not trying to get some of this back. Let's put it that way. So there's a whole bunch of different little pieces of the puzzle they have to address, including basis, to make that so.
Our next taxation matter is otherwise tax deductible expenses paid with the RF grants will still be deductible. Similar to the PPP, for instance, back when the PPP came out, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to deduct those payroll costs, that we use the PPP funds for. And then the decision was made, and yes, they were allowed to be tax deductible. Same thing with the RRF grant funds. All of those are tax deductible expenses. All of the expenses that we talked about earlier, the utilities, the rent, the accounting, the legal, maintenance, cleaning, those kinds of things are all going to still be deductible on your tax returns. Next, many states such as Ohio conform to the federal tax code and therefore will exempt RRF grant funds from the state taxable income, and presumably on the CAT tax as well. We're not certain on the CAT tax, is that correct, Tim?
Well, yeah, we're not 100% certain on
Yeah.
just trying to play off of some of how the treatments of the other programs.
Right. Yeah, I think that's still a presumable.
Right, exactly. But for sure on the state side, we know that, but we're hoping on the CAT tax side as well that will not be taxable. And our last topic we're going to discuss this afternoon is our interplay with the PPP in the ERTC. We have some facts and suggestions for everyone this afternoon. Our first fact is the ERTC must be calculated using 100% of your payroll costs.
I think it's worth noting the ERTC has been an interesting program. The ERTC has been one that when the ERTC first came out, the Employer Retention Tax Credit, it was written in a manner that most of us as tax professionals kind of ignored because of the fact that if you received PPP, you couldn't take the Employee Retention Tax Credit. Mm-hmm. So many of us looked at this and said, and there were all these rules and limitations surrounding who could and who couldn't take these tax credits. So most of us looked at it and said, well, geez, oh man, if that means that this doesn't allow me to use this PPP money, I'm not worried about that. I'm not going to pay any attention to that. I'm not going to be utilizing those tax credits because obviously we're going to go get the PPP money. But when they came out earlier this year and made the clarification and update to the tax law that said, but wait, there's more. You can, in fact, take the ERTC and receive PPP money. You just can't use it for the same dollars. It was a game changer. And I think that, man, you know what, Chuck, I feel like I sound more and more like a nerd every day because this type of stuff is just the stuff we're talking about in the office. I feel like but wait, there's more every day when it comes.
Tim, you've always seemed like a nerd to me. I don't know how this increases. Go ahead.
Just more of a nerd. That's good.
More of a nerd. Okay, go.
So this is something that I think that is not to be taken lightly and or for granted, is to make sure that if you're participating in more than one of these programs, you got to look at almost every single one of them. And the ERTC one is one that many people disregarded initially, but it has changed. You can amend your tax returns. You can go back and grab some of those tax credits. You just have to be careful about how these things play into one another. So the ERTC is most certainly one that I think will be an underutilized tool because of that confusion initially, but one worth paying a ton of attention to.
Absolutely. I like how Tim, you used the word, well, they came back and said, but you could, that's the famous line in the tax law. If this, then, but you can't use this. I feel like that's a very common theme when coming out with all of these different items. It's very, very tricky as well. So again, consulting with your tax advisor about all of these resources that are out there for you and making sure that you're getting the most benefit from each one of them is really, really huge. With our second fact, the PPP second loan must be calculated using at least 60% of the payroll costs. And then our third fact there is the RRF that has no percentage requirement for allocating amongst eligible categories, in which it's the most flexible of the three programs. And it was like they were waiting to put out the best program, the RRF, last, save the best for last for all of our restaurants. This is definitely like we said, the most flexible of the three. And our fourth fact is our payroll costs utilized for the PPP2 forgiveness calculation cannot also be used for the ERTC calculation.
All right. And this is where things get really nerdy.
Yeah.
Right? You can't, the expenses that you use for the ERTC cannot be deductible because you're using them to get a credit. But the expenses you use for a PPP2 are deductible because much like the RRF grant, the PPP proceeds are not taxable, the expenses are deductible. And so since you already have to use up to 60% of your payroll costs on PPP2 only, use them there first because they're deductible, and then next over to the ERTC. Okay, and then RRF. Go ahead, Kristy. Sorry, I had to get that out. That had to come out of me.
which went perfectly into our next suggestion, Chuck. So no, that's perfect. Like Chuck just mentioned, so before applying for that ERTC, you want to calculate your forgiveness of the PPP loan, the second loan, since 60% of the PPP must be payroll costs. So avoiding that tax-free loan, avoid trading a tax-free loan with a taxable one, the PPP2 for the ERTC. And then you want to utilize the RRF last of the group programs. Again, it's just super important to make sure that you're getting the biggest benefit from all three of these in the order in which you do all of your calculations. Again, reaching out to your tax advisor, consulting, working with them, to get that. And remember, you're working with your tax advisor. That's just another added cost, which is an eligible expense for the RRF. So our last suggestion is, in consideration of the above, consider utilizing payroll costs for recruitment bonuses. We see a lot of people out there that, just are really starving for people just to come back to work and things like that. And this, you could utilize payroll costs, to get those people that you need, the people that you need in there to help, run your business. You've got these funds now, and you've got, this money that you can utilize and say, okay, let's bring these people back. Let's give them some bonuses to get them back in here to get the restaurant up and running and have a full staff. So that's another suggestion that we have for you this afternoon.
I think, Chuck, this kind of comes back to some of the conversations that we've had in regards to restaurants over the course of the last couple of months amongst all of our teams is we're in a position where we're bribing people to come back to work. It unfortunately has come to this. I've been reading articles where McDonald's is paying people $50 to show up to applications. O'Charlie's is giving away a free car and giving away raffle tickets to people as they show up to interviews and stick around. There's all these programs that people are now implementing to just get people to come to work, and even not necessarily to come to work, but to just show up to a darn interview.
Right.
It is the most challenging item in the world of restaurants currently is how do we get the labor force to come back to work? So
Mhm.
when I talk about using this money to come back, when I talk about using this money to set yourself up for the future, this is probably one of those areas that I feel is the most important, is building out some new programs, whether it be hiring referral programs where you're building your current work team and employment pool to go and recruit their friends and recruit other people in the industry by giving them referral bonuses and retainage bonuses and saying, hey, if you bring in one of your friends to come and work, we're going to give you a $50 bonus. And if they stick around for 30 days, we're going to give you another $50 bonus. And, those are the things, unfortunately, that we have to do as employers right now to get good people to come to work. So this is the time to sit down with your advisors, to sit down with your professionals, and to create those strategies to get those people back in, because it's only going to get more competitive because a lot of restaurants are going to be getting this money and the unemployment benefits are going to start running out. And as we've seen, some states are starting to implement different mandates to minimize people's access to those unemployment benefits. There's going to be a labor force challenge for the foreseeable future. So don't be shy about getting creative, and don't be shy about sitting down with your team of professionals, accountants, advisors, attorneys, marketing professionals, whatever it might be, to spend this money appropriately so that you can get back to work, because that's going to be the hardest thing you've got to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the same with some of our restaurant clients, that was the first struggle is, the only open until 10 o'clock. And that was a real struggle for a lot of bars and, after hour places, things like that, and then once that was lifted, it was like, oh, checking in with the restaurant clients and how's everything going? Well, it would be great if I could, get some people to work. So like, I echo that 100%, Tim, that, you be creative, use your team to figure out how you can get those employees in there and utilize those funds absolutely, in your best interest. So that concludes all of the slides we have today. If anybody has any questions.
And it looks as though we've got a pretty light Q&A. So I don't think we have a ton of issues here that we need to address. I do want to say this has been one of the last, let's call it 12 months of keeping up with all this stuff has been interesting, to say the least. The collaborative nature of our industry has been amazing. We've formed a lot of new relationships with a lot of new friends. Our friends at Apple Growth Partners have been amazing in their COVID response. They have been on the forefront of everything. The webinars constantly, great emails, great calculators, great different resources for how to continue to deal with all of these programs that have been put in front of us. Kristy was wonderful enough to take the time to join us for this webinar today, and Chuck as well. So I gotta definitely give you guys a huge thank you, shout out for all of your help along with this process and help in creating this resource to our community here with the Business Journal and here in the greater Youngstown and Northeast Ohio region.
Absolutely. Our pleasure, Tim.
Our pleasure, Tim, and a thank you to Jeff and Ryan with the Business Journal for hosting.
Yeah, thank you guys. You all did an excellent job. I was watching before I was pulled in, so I did retain a lot of the info. But if anyone has questions, we're going to have this in a full recap, cleaned up and on the website soon, and you'll be able to check it out there. So I will close with thank you all and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that little bell for notifications. And also make sure to connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. For all of your business news, visit businessjournaldaily.com. For all of your arts and entertainment news, go to afterhoursyoungstown.com.